Berkovitz versus the United States that you brought up earlier, Mr. Trout. Let's let Professor Cohen, can you give us a little bit of an idea? This involves the vaccine and the liability of the federal government in some of these issues.
Well, what we have here is a vaccine put on the market with the licensing and approval of the federal government. There is a division of biological standards that has to pass on vaccines before they can be released. Here, the allegation was that this vaccine was put on the market without the proper procedures having been followed. The lower courts dismissed the case. The suit is brought under the Federal Tort Claims Act. The Federal Tort Claims Act was passed in 1946. Before that, you could not sue the federal government in tort. But the Federal Tort Claims Act has various exceptions to it. The first of those exceptions is what is called the discretionary function exception. And the government argued that that the approval of a vaccine is a discretionary function, and therefore they should not be subject to liability. Here what happened is that the vaccine was put on the market, and a child took it. This is a polio vaccine, and he contracted polio. And the allegation is, and I don't know whether it's true, nobody does at this point, but the allegation is that it was put on the market improperly because the proper tests and standards were not followed, and the government did not do its job. And as I said, the government argued this was a discretionary function, and they should not be liable for what happened. All that the Supreme Court ruled, and I keep coming back that you have narrow issues before the Supreme Court, all that the Supreme Court ruled was that if there are statutory or regulatory or policy procedures that you have to follow, if there are things that the law has set forth for the government employee to follow, and the government employee does not follow, then that's not a discretionary function. A discretionary function is where you have a judgment area. You have an area in which you are making a policy decision. Then if you make that policy decision within an area that you are entitled to, and somebody gets injured by that, then the federal government is not liable. But here, if, and we don't know that, this case still hasn't been tried, it has to go back for trial. If it is demonstrated that there are certain policies, certain regulatory procedures, certain statutory requirements that are set forth and the employee failed to follow it, and this child was injured because of it, then the government is liable. There is, as the court said, there is no discretion to fail to follow a regulatory procedure.
Mr. Trout, do you agree that it's a fairly narrow decision?
Yes, I do agree. And I think the decision is four square with what the statute. I think you can.
Yes, that's absolutely right, I think.
Yeah, I think they interpreted the legislature correctly. Yeah. I think you can doubt the wisdom, perhaps, of that particular statute. Perhaps the manufacturers are better defendants because they're the ones that are most likely to prevent anything bad from happening in the manufacturing process. But I think they were exactly correct on what the statute said.
But what we have done as a society through the statutes that Congress has passed, we have said to the federal government, you be the watchguard. And these vaccines cannot come on the market unless you are satisfied that the tests have been made, unless you have the test results, and unless they demonstrate that the standards have been adhered to. And so that when I take a vaccine, when you take one, when you give one to your child, you are doing that with a knowledge that the federal government has done its job of overlooking these manufacturers to be sure that they are not pulling something on us.
Oh, I'm not at all challenging the validity or questioning the validity of the government regulating vaccines. But I am suggesting that that the government has deeper pockets, and they're going to be more likely the target of a lot of these lawsuits.
Well, actually, isn't this a good policy result, though? We've seen with the what is it, the whooping cough vaccine, where the suits were against the manufacturers have gone out of business. They've stopped making it. Now, as I understand it, there's always the possibility of something going wrong. In this kind of a suit, the Berkovitz case, you have the cost spread throughout the entire population. The vaccine, I assume, will continue to be made. And so from the standpoint of broad policy, I don't want to see vaccines disappear. I want my children and grandchildren to have them. I want to see more of them.
Well, I think they are unlikely to disappear, though. We'll always have.
The whooping cough one is a real example, isn't it?
Well, I think there's always going to be cases where unfortunately people don't have remedies. I think that's the nature of the beast. I would argue, though, that if you pass the cost on, if the cost of liability is borne by the manufacturer is likely to be much more careful as to the type of product
that's
it produces.
That's the theory of the product liability law, and I agree with you.
Unanimous decision by the court. Was
Yes, oh sure, well, but that's the narrow statutory decision, and I don't think anyone would argue with it.